Greetings, Guardians. This is Olympus Alliance. And today we are talking about one of the strangest, most relentless and most dangerous scaling tanks in Hero Wars, Alliance. Mushy and Shroom. Or maybe a better way to describe them. A growing nightmare. Because Guardians. This little girl and her fungal familiar do not fight like normal tanks at all. They do not rush battles. They do not explode enemies immediately. They do not rely on simple brute survivability. No. Mushy and Shroom grow. And if you hesitate, if you fail to stop them early, the battlefield slowly becomes overrun by an unstoppable fungal legion. That is what makes this hero so unique. And one thing players must understand immediately is that Mushy and Shroom are not a traditional tank in any sense of the word. Because she is the only tank in the game that is not strength-based. And Guardians. That changes everything. Normally tanks rely heavily on strength scaling for gigantic health pools and direct survivability. Mushy does not. Which means her survivability behaves very differently from heroes like Julius, Astaroth, Corvus, or Aurora. At first glance, many players may even think this is a weakness. But in reality, it creates extremely interesting advantages. Because Mushy becomes far less vulnerable against enemies that reduce a hero's main stat. And that matters much more than many players realize. Certain heroes love reducing strength to cripple tanks and massively lower their health pools instantly. Against Mushy, that strategy becomes dramatically less effective. Because her survivability is not tied to strength scaling in the same way. And this creates a very unusual defensive identity. But Guardians. Mushy is far more than simply a tank. That is where things become truly dangerous. Because under the correct conditions, Mushy slowly transforms into a scaling damage monster. And this is why long fights become terrifying against her. Her power scales through maximum health, healing, and magic attack. And every single one of those elements continuously amplifies her battlefield pressure. More healing, more scaling, more maximum health, more scaling, more magic attack, even more scaling. And the most dangerous part. This growth is permanent during the battle. Once Mushy starts building momentum, there is no reverse button. No step backward. Her pressure simply keeps rising higher and higher as the fight continues. And then the nightmare becomes even worse. Because this scaling can multiply across up to 4 copies. 4. And Guardians. Once multiple copies begin stacking pressure together, the battlefield becomes absolute chaos. Magic damage starts overwhelming enemies from every direction while Mushy continues growing stronger behind the scenes. And unlike many scaling heroes, Mushy does not only rely on raw damage pressure. She also brings silence. And silence is devastating in longer fights. Especially against magic compositions. Because once enemies are silenced, they lose access to active skills. No proper retaliation. No clean combo rotations. No momentum recovery. And suddenly the enemy team starts collapsing slowly while Mushy's fungal army keeps growing stronger. This is why Mushy becomes such a terrifying choice in fights decided through pure force and endurance. Especially battles where crowd control has limited value, damage over time struggles to keep up, or brute scaling pressure dominates the battlefield. Because Mushy loves those environments. The longer the chaos continues, the stronger she becomes. And another terrifying detail. Even if Mushy eventually falls, her copies can continue fighting afterward. That is disgusting. Because enemies often spend huge effort finally bringing her down, only to discover the battlefield is still flooded with dangerous fungal pressure afterward. And Guardians. This is exactly why Mushy demands strong support around her. Because once you keep her stable long enough, she becomes overwhelming. And naturally, her best allies are heroes capable of providing healing, maximum health amplification, sustain, and defensive stability. One of the greatest examples, Alvanor and Guardians. This pairing is beautiful, because Alvanor accelerates Mushy's fungal development massively. He heals incomplete shrooms, which helps accelerate her branching mycelium mechanics and overall battlefield pressure. At the same time, he protects against incoming basic attack damage. And this matters enormously because Mushy's biggest goal is simple: survive long enough for the fungal nightmare to fully begin. Alvanor buys her that time beautifully. He stabilizes the front line. He reduces incoming pressure. He allows Mushy's scaling to fully activate. And once that happens, good luck stopping her. But now let's move toward one of the strongest and most explosive combinations around Mushy right now. Aidan Xe'Sha and Guardians. This trio is absolutely terrifying, because every part of their mechanics feeds directly into Mushy's scaling identity. Aidan increases maximum health. Xe'Sha manipulates and amplifies magic attack. Mushy converts both into escalating battlefield destruction. This creates immediate chaotic pressure from the very beginning of the fight. And unlike slower scaling teams, this combination can begin snowballing almost instantly. The sacrifice mechanics, the healing loops, the health amplification, everything starts connecting together beautifully. And suddenly Mushy transforms from durable frontline into an unstoppable magical wrecking ball. Especially in longer battles where Xe'Sha continues amplifying pressure further and further. And Guardians. There are even more fantastic support options available for Mushy compositions. Byrna, for example. Extremely valuable. Because Byrna gives Mushy several things she absolutely loves: energy acceleration, magic penetration, and sustain against damage over time pressure. And that sustain matters massively now in the current meta. Because many teams rely heavily on dot pressure, constant battlefield debuffs, and gradual chip damage. Byrna helps stabilize Mushy through all of that while also helping her reach dangerous momentum much faster. Then we have Guus and Guardians. Guus beside Mushy feels unbelievably frustrating to fight against. Because Guus provides massive healing, stability, burst recovery, and long fight sustain. Which again, is exactly what Mushy wants. Time. That is the keyword around Mushy and Shroom. Time to scale. Time to multiply. Time to overwhelm. And Guus gives her enormous amounts of it. Together, they create battles that feel impossible to finish quickly. Pressure gets absorbed. Healing keeps stabilizing the front line. Copies continue multiplying. Magic damage keeps scaling. And eventually, the battlefield simply collapses under the fungal pressure. That is why Mushy and Shroom remain one of the most unique tanks in the entire game. Because they are not trying to survive through simple defensive stats. They survive through growth. Through multiplication. Through scaling. Through becoming stronger and stronger until enemies cannot keep up anymore. And Guardians. That design is incredible. Because Mushy rewards patience, team building, Long-term planning. Sustained management. She is not a hero for players searching for instant flashy victories. She is a hero for players who enjoy watching battles slowly become impossible for the enemy to survive. And once you fully understand how to support her correctly, you begin realizing why Mushy remains such a terrifying force inside the Dominion. Stay tuned, stay sharp. And as always, salute and friendship.